Hey drivers, welcome back to the shop. In case you missed it, Dweezil is on the road. We've made it all the way to the coast and back. It was a great time, so check out that video if you haven't seen it. Now we're in that really cool phase of the project where we get to optimize what's here. The chassis of Dweezil is solid, no problems there. But the engine, well, we built that out of a bunch of worn out parts. If you want to catch up on that, check out the engine rebuild video from a few years ago and you'll see the whole idea of why we built an engine out of worn out parts. The short version is full-on experiment. We're trying to get a compromised engine to run as best and reliable as possible. And so there's only so much you can do, right? Without replacing parts with good, fresh parts. One of those things we can do is get the heat riser to work correctly. That's this thing. We've got one that's in decent enough shape to actually work. We made one for Project Vandemic, but this one, we'll just go ahead and use it. But this is not right. So we can make an improvement there. Like if we really wanted to improve the exhaust, we would change out this silly 2-into-2 thing for a 4-into-1 exhaust, like this one over here. And we may play with that at some point also, but for today, I'm just having too much fun with this 2-into-2 exhaust. It's loud, it's fun, it sounds really neat. Let's work with this one. So what is it that is wrong about the way that this exhaust is designed? Well, the thing is this center-mounted carb has a long way to send the fuel-air mixture to finally get into the heads. And along the way, it cools down. The problem with that is it has less of an ability to suspend the atomized fuel, and it starts to condense on the walls of the intake manifold. And then you just have raw fuel, which isn't going to do you any good because raw fuel doesn't burn, believe it or not. Vapor burns. That fuel has to stay atomized to get all the way down in there and burn in the cylinder efficiently. And one way to make that happen, other than just having like dual carbs in a really short run, is to keep this path warm. And that's what this heat riser is supposed to do. Looking at an intake manifold out of the car, here's where our heat comes from. On the number 3 exhaust stack, we'll have positive pressure of hot exhaust gases here flowing this direction. It's thermally coupled through this cast aluminum between the two tubes, the one for the heat riser and the one for the intake manifold itself, and it makes kind of a thermal jacket all the way across. Now this is clearanced out for the generator stand and the generator, but otherwise we've got pretty good coverage here to thoroughly warm the air coming out of that carburetor and making its way down into the heads. Now we need the flow of exhaust gas to keep on going, right? There's no way we're going to get hot air in here if we're not getting the cooler air out over here. That's where we run into trouble with most aftermarket exhaust. This side is set up just like the other side, so they're just going to be pushing against each other. Now we end up with a weak pulse of exhaust going back and forth across that heat riser, which is going to do little to heat anything up and a whole lot to clog this pipe with carbon. A nice steady flow is going to do us a whole lot better. So let's take a look at a stock exhaust to see how the plumbing was designed by VW. Here's a stock Beetle exhaust. We see a similar situation with the bus exhaust, but there's only one tailpipe on those. Otherwise, this heat riser thing is the same. So we have heat coming out of here at the number 3 exhaust stack and into the heat riser as we saw a moment ago. But here's the key. Here's what's different. This does not go down into the exhaust pipe, because that's a high pressure area and it would prevent the exhaust from flowing as well as we would want. So instead what they did is they ran this tube all the way down there and into the resonator portion of the exhaust, pretty much going straight out the tailpipe. There's some stuff in the way there, but this is a low pressure area, so it's not going to impede the flow of those gases to come through this way and get out of the car. Now just to confuse everybody, here's an older stock exhaust where all the same principles apply, but everything's backwards. So the high pressure side on this one is over next to number 2, and the low pressure side is over next to number 3, and that's where the pipe bends around and makes its way out of the exhaust. I don't see a big difference either way, just as long as there's a high pressure side and a low pressure side so that we can flow some heat through the heat riser. But just thought I'd point that out. We're going to do something similar on this one, and it'll be interesting to see, one, how much of an improvement we make. So we're going to take some temperature readings here to see what the temperatures are now and what they are later. And two, what does it sound like once we've done a little bit of plumbing with the exhaust? So let's get started. We're going to do a short run in the car just to get things up to temperature, and then we'll take some measurements on the heat riser and see what our starting point is. Here we go. I have a worn throttle shaft bushing. You'll notice the vacuum meter dips every now and then, and I have a wandering idle. Everything else is pretty tight. I've cleaned up the carb and messed around with the jets, and I have it as good as I think it can get, but really it just needs a new bushing in the throttle shaft, and that's kind of a specialist gig. About 165 on that elbow. And up here, it's all the way down to 120. It's really not that hot. Over here, it's about 165, 163, somewhere in there, at the elbow. And up here, once again, about 123. So that's not good. I'm pretty sure the exhaust is warmer than that, but even more telling is that it's symmetrical on both sides of the heat riser. It really, like if we think about it a second, it should be the hottest here and stay hot, relatively speaking, up to there, at which point it really cools down as the heat is removed throughout the manifold. And then on this side, it should be much cooler. Right? So this should be the hot side, because that's where the pressure is, and this should be the cool side as the old exhaust air finally makes its way out of the exhaust. So we got to fix that. I think I'm going to let this cool down for a little bit. I'll tidy up the garage for a while, and then we'll come back to it and start tearing into this thing. Things are cooled off, so we're going to go ahead and get started. First thing we want to do is make sure that there's a pathway for exhaust to come up through this little tube here and through the flange and into the heat riser. It looks like it's there, but we're not going to trust this thing. We may find a little bit of a surprise once we take this off and get a good look at it. We've all had a situation where the exhaust fasteners did not cooperate, and we ended up with busted off studs and rounded off nuts and all kinds of nightmares. At some point, age almost makes that inevitable, but this exhaust, while it's put on with used parts, that was part of the thesis behind this engine here, is just don't put any money into it, just see what we can make it do. I used quite a bit of copper anti-seize, and that really seems to make a difference. I want to make sure that the threads are clean before we reinstall them. And I'll put a good dab of copper anti-seize on there. This looks like a bit of an exhaust leak. That's what I get for reusing the gasket. I'm alright with that. It's a Baja. This one is a slightly smaller nut. It's still the same stud size, but it takes a 12mm wrench. And on the inside of the bend of this tube, that's kind of a nice thing to have there so it fully seats. So a different wrench size here than normal, kind of like we do on the intake manifold. Put that aside. A used gasket. So here's the big surprise. We look down in there and there's not even a hole through the exhaust pipe. We look in here, not even a hole. So we gotta fix that. There's no way any heat is gonna come out of this thing if there's no hole for it to flow through. So I think what we need to do is just cut all this off. This is useless. Unless I can drill a hole down through there. I might try that first. Chances are I'm gonna drill through something. It's not the straightest thing, so there's a chance that I break a drill bit or 2 or 9 and I come out the side here. And if it gets too ugly, we'll just cut all of this out and make our own pipe. But we gotta clear that passage one way or the other. For anybody keeping score, this is a 1/2 inch drill bit. That was cool. With that little piece of drama, we did start the hole, so I'm tempted to try it again. I'm going to run the drill backwards a little bit to see if I can smooth off any rough edges here. Okay, I've actually seen enough. That was worth a shot, but where the top of the hole is will actually be going through the side of the connector tube, and that's kind of silly. So let's just cut it all off, clean it up, and put something proper in there. I think I will stick with the 1/2 inch hole though. Okay, we're relatively flat here. Now I'm not exactly sure where I want to drill that hole, so let's put this on the car, cut the pipe and mark it, drill the hole, and then we can get things welded into place. Looking at where the hole is here, we're going to have to go at a bit of an angle to get into this pipe without missing it. So there's going to be a lot of test fitting and grinding here, but nothing difficult, just a little tedious. I took some rough measurements of about 3/4 of an inch on one side, on the short side, and 1/8 of an inch on the long side. So I have basically a flat flange. So I'm probably going to trim this down a little bit here because we're going at an angle. And then the side of the pipe is something like that. So I'll just cut this way and then we'll start grinding. I think I'll tilt it more by shaving some of this down. I think I might go ahead and scallop this out a little bit for the curve. And then we'll just go from there. Okay, I'm going to take off this edge here. Okay, I think that's cool. It looks decently snug and we'll be able to fill in any gaps with weld. So what I'm going to do is look at it from underneath and make sure I've got this lined up with the hole in this flange, and then I'll tack it to that flange and mark the exhaust tube so I can drill the hole. hit the hole. I'll take that. Something like this. Hopefully covering the hole that I just drilled. Okay, we'll take the exhaust off one more time, get all this welded up, and I think we'll be good on this side. I think this side is good. So my idea is that this is low pressure here because it's a bigger space and the air is exiting. So I just need to get this outlet to there. The funny thing here is we don't have to involve the exhaust stack at all. It's really just going to be from this flange here. So we'll cut all this out, clean up this flange like we did the other side, and then from the hole in that flange, we're just going to plumb from there over to here. Let's take a look at how we can run a pipe between those two parts. So I'm going to have to get this thing to point up. So we're going to do some funny stuff on the end of this pipe to see if we can make that happen. We'll do some slicing and bending down there and then just place the flange on top of that. I think the angle is going to be slightly up. I mean, I could come straight across, I guess, but we'll probably go slightly up to here. Poke a hole in there, weld the pipe on, and be good. So a little bit of shaping the metal here, a little bit of grinding to get things to fit like we want it to. Let's go ahead and take this off. I am prepared to make multiple attempts at this, which is good because I'm just guessing at it. What I want to accomplish here on this end is to connect to the bottom of the flange. So it'll roughly be something like this. So I want to close off the end by curling up the end of the pipe, right? So I'll split it here, and it may take about that much from the bottom of the pipe here to close off the end. So I'll need to slice almost all the way through. So I'll open this up, probably cut some of this off, fold the end up to close off the end. Then I'm going to have to flatten things a little bit. So I think I'll use this area of the metal to accomplish that. And so I'll continue my slice down this way and end up bending these portions straight up. Here I may be able to transition that with some weld, and then of course the whole thing may fail miserably. So let's just see what happens. We're going to end up putting this here ish. I think I'm gonna weld this up and this and across here and maybe a little bit there, and probably have to do some grinding. But before I do that, because this is galvanized steel, I'm going to go ahead and dunk this in some muriatic acid to remove that zinc coating. That stuff's pretty nasty when you weld it. While that's doing its thing, we'll go ahead and get the exhaust back in place so we can start sizing things up and test fitting and so on. I'm going to go ahead and clean up these old fasteners too. Okay, I think we have something here. I'm going to target up here. So I just want to make sure I don't cut off too much of this pipe. Alright, we'll see if we can cut that and not mess everything up. I think that's going to be close enough to weld it on there. Over here things look good. So before I tack anything, I need to get the hole drilled in the exhaust pipe, and I want to mark this exactly like it is now so I know where to drill that hole. Okay, I'm going to get this cleaned off and we'll start tacking it in. I think that's rigid enough. Cool, we'll be able to bend it if we need to, and it'll hold itself in place. All right, I am anxious to try this thing out. About 255, 260 or so. That's about 100 degrees hotter than it was before the mod. Now that's on the high pressure side. Up here. Lost a lot of heat by the time we get up here. Even more over here. By the time we get over here, it's down to 130. It's definitely hotter on this side. than it is on this side. Pretty cool results from this little test. Now, as far as final conclusions, like really did it get for me? That's going to be a little bit harder to say. What I feel like after that run is that the engine runs a little smoother than it did before, which would be consistent with what the heat riser is supposed to accomplish. We're supposed to be getting more atomized fuel, like what's necessary for the engine to run well, all the way down into the cylinders. So it seemed like it was running smoother. It also was running about 10 degrees cooler on the cylinder head temp. This is a little warmer of a day than the last time I ran the engine, so I don't know, maybe there's something there as well. I think really what this is, the benefit of doing this mod to an aftermarket exhaust is more in the long game. If we're not putting raw fuel down into the cylinders, I think we can expect our piston and cylinder sets to last longer because they're not getting washed out by that raw fuel. Probably going to have healthier spark plugs too. I don't know, this is just me guesstimating at this point, but I got a good feeling about doing things of this sort, and that's why I pursue them, and I'm happy that you came along with me for the journey. So definitely saw some differences from beginning to end in terms of the temperatures of the heat riser. Before, we saw about the same temperature on one side versus the other, but once we made this modification, we saw greater than 100-degree difference, showing that there was definitely some flow of heat through the pipe, some of which was conducted into the intake manifold as designed. So I think we've done a good thing here. It wasn't that difficult, just use some electrical conduit to get it done like we've done before. If you want to see more about heat risers, we fabricated one from scratch in Project Vandemic episode 12, so check that out on the screen right now, and we'll see you in the next video.